we are talking about economic growth, we always talk about being sort of economic growth being linear. It is growing and resources are unlimited. And as the climate change discourse is increasing, we are realizing that resources are not limited. And also this sort of misconceptions around development. Like for instance in Nepal and other parts of the Himalayas, we see that people take bulldozer as an icon for development. So what we call it bulldozer terrorism. People just, roads being built from nowhere to nowhere are being seen as icons of prosperity. And resources are not, unlimited. It is limited. It has its impact. We are also seeing more research being done on energy generation like hydropower. What does it do? What does it do to ground level? And what if the ground level goes down and then, we are not going to have grass, then you're not going to have deers. If there's no deers, there's no tiger. If there's no tiger, there's no high-end tourism. So there are all these things are related. So these are some of around the basics. We're just going to have a round of discussions with the panel, and I think again I will just move on to become a bit more of a glorified timekeeper. We would have a couple of rounds among the panelists, and then we have an app. Please, if you have downloaded the app, please do. If not, please do take advantage of the free Wi-Fi, and please download the app and do ask questions in the app, and we would have some time to respond to some of the questions that have come from the floor. So let us start on the first round in terms of all our speakers, and I would start from the extreme right in talking about how do you relate to this topic of circular economy. So maybe Kezang, and a bit of an introduction about yourself, about what you do, and how do you relate to the topic.
Thanks, Sujeev, for a wonderful opening of the session. My name is Kezang, and I am the senior partner for a consulting firm in Bhutan. I have worked in the government for a couple of years, joined the private sector, and then did some civil society projects around sustainability, and specifically green public procurement, integrating aspects of social and environmental criteria into the public procurement system in Bhutan. Relating to the session, I'd like to touch upon why there is a compelling case for circular Himalayas. I don't want to call it Himalayan Circular Economy because that gives you a bounded scenario. Then I would like to move to what Bhutan brings to the consensus discourse today and moving forward, and perhaps some of the action items, proposed actions that we could come out in this session. In terms of pursuing, or rather aspiring towards a shared future through an intentional systemic shift from a conventional linear model to a new generation circular Himalayas, founded around people, innovation, and cooperation, the theme of this session event today, without reinventing the wheel. This is what we are aspiring to achieve today. And some of the pathways towards that, as a starting point, I guess in general, are understanding the local, regional, and global contexts, implementing sustainable procurement under the larger umbrella of sustainable consumption and production, propagating clear legal policy and regulatory frameworks, supporting local and regional stakeholders, and of course, collaboration and not competition is the way forward. And I think we have had very aggressive, sustained rhetoric. And I think in the speeches around earlier today, there was emphasis on going towards a transformative, sustained action. We have been talking too much, too long. We are still talking. And I think this is a platform, a good platform for us to join hands. This is the fourth summit, I guess. This is my first time attending this. And I'm happy to be part of the story to take this, to walk our talks. And it is to be now or never.
Thank you. Thank you, Kezang. So I move on to Kushal. So a bit about what do you do as Doko recyclers and how do you connect to the theme of circular economy?
Hello. Good morning. Thank you, Sujeev. So my name is Kushal. I'm one of the co-founders of Doko Recyclers. We are a recyclable waste management company. So our vision is to move away from a reliance on landfill dumping and the way it is being currently done to implement segregation of waste at source. So basically, we want to set the benchmark for how waste should actually be handled and move entirely in the so the way it happens right now is, it's all mixed together. It's in a POCO, and it's like in a mixed bag with POCO that we call it. You toss it in a tractor, and out of sight, out of mind. We don't know what's happening, and most people don't even know where our waste is landing up or what sort of environmental degradation is happening out of it. Well, in our case, it's not really out of sight either. Waste is obvious in terms of it's choking our rivers, it's polluting our environment, our communities, and this is a problem that we aim to solve at Doko Recyclers. So waste is obviously so interconnected with the idea of a circular notion in terms of the waste from one industry could easily well become the input for another. And so, Sujeev, do I go into details?
No, I think you can just talk about how do you, relate to the topic. I think and we'll keep the conversation flowing. Yeah.
So, how we relate to the topic is in terms of how do you close the loops between industries, right? How do you ensure that we're not just that we go away from a take, make, and dispose model, and we make it truly circular in terms of the economy, in terms of the industries that are popping up in Nepal, in terms of and in terms of, sorry, I lost my train of thought. And so, if you look at the term called waste, right? We look at it in terms of waste is often a derogatory term in terms of something that is to throw away. But waste is something that we think it's something that has lost its utility in its present form, but does not mean that it does not have utility in any other form. So it could easily be used as the raw material for some other industry. So it's about how do you link these connections and build a truly circular economy.
Thanks. I think definitely, Kushal, I'll come to a bit more in detail on the recycling part, because if we look at globally how circular economy is understood, it has a lot of emphasis on the recycling part, and I think that's where the focus has been. And I think we will talk a bit more about specifics. I'll just move on to Shanti to really, since coming in from UNDP Nepal, talking a bit about sort of what do you do within UNDP and how do you connect with the topic? A quick remark, and then we'll come in the second round, we'll discuss more specific on SDGs and circular economy.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sujeev on this. I'm Shanti. I work as portfolio manager looking after the environment and climate resilience, the new buzzword, portfolio in UNDP. And I'll tell you how do I relate to circular economy. I think I relate to it at the personal level as well as at the corporate level as UNDP. Circular economy might sound like a new term, but it has been part of our lifestyle, our lives all the time, I guess, because if we reuse a bottle, if we reuse a can, that is part of the circular economy for me. It doesn't have to be a big deal, right? It can be as individual level as well. So, but coming back to how is it relating to what I do, I think it forms a core of what I work and what my results lead to in UNDP, because working in the environment and climate change, it is the core of what I do. For instance, because we work in the area and then we aspire to go towards low carbon development pathways, and that is where the circular economy comes into the picture. So that is how I relate to. And it doesn't have to be only waste or, solid waste or kind of waste, but it can be, it can go beyond that. It can be in the agriculture sector, that is also how I relate to the nutrient loss. for example, or debris management, like after the earthquake, what did we do with our construction debris? That's also how I relate as UNDP to circular economy, because like the construction material, it can be put back as part of the construction. Like that is also how I relate at the corporate level. And if we go to the renewable energy, if we fuel the development with the renewable energy, which is produced here and going back to contributing to the national economy, that is a circular economy for me and for UNDP in that sense. And also, if we talk about electronic waste, like, so when I talk about at the corporate level and how as a UNDP I relate to, managing the e-waste that we are doing in China, like that is also how I relate to circular economy, right? And so it goes, I can just go on and on, I think, but we can, I relate it through and with circular economy through and through, and it is, for me, part of life and also part of what I do for living as well.
Thank you, Shanti. That was very useful and very crisp. And I think I will come back to you maybe after I talk to Sixit on circular economy and SDGs. And Sixit, yeah, what do you do and how do you relate to the circular economy?
Good morning, namaste. My name is Sixit and I run Tootle, the ride-sharing platform. I don't know how it relates to circular economy, but what we basically do is we try to utilize the rear seat of a motorcycle to enable point-to-point mobility for people and at the same time create jobs for thousands of people. I'd rather like to coin a word because I'm a part of technology. I'd rather say it a dematerialized economy. And traditionally, if you look at how technology has evolved, while there is a lot of hue and cry about climate change, sustainability right now, while the problems that we face are urgent, but we have done significant in the past, even though we need to do a lot in future. Now, see, if we remember, we used to use the cassettes, the vinyl tapes, to listen to music. What technology has done is it's moved from a vinyl tape to CDs, to nothingness of MP3. So we've dematerialized music, isn't it? With iPads and with Kezang looking at his own iPad there, he's dematerialized papers. That's what we've done in the past. With ride sharing, we've dematerialized mobility, isn't it? With Airbnb, we've dematerialized houses, buildings. So I think we need to move a step further, because we have a lot of technology that we can develop into dematerialized economy. And I was listening to Valerie speak this morning where she was talking about the notion of prosperity, how we see prosperity. And I think it's the time with innovation, with technology, we need to dematerialize prosperity. And the way we can dematerialize prosperity is by changing the notion, for example, from transportation to mobility, from ownership to shared economy. And I think if we get into this narrative of dematerialized world, we would create more sustainable world. So I think it's about time when we move from circular economy to a dematerialized economy. And I think that's how we relate to the topic here.
Thank you, Sixit. I think, yeah, I recall the remarks by Valerie in the opening session where she talked about how what does prosperity does really mean about economic development and about also the icons of prosperity as we keep talking about. And I'll come back to you, Sixit, in terms of how, we see technology helping to dematerialize, a bit more in detail, and to see that how this can actually build the platforms of what we are talking about, a circular economy. Because I think it's also important to realize that we don't get into, into jargons. So I remember when electric vehicles came to Nepal, we had agencies that were buying electric vehicles, but they were charging it with electricity that was produced from diesel generators, and so that doesn't really make sense. It just becomes another, sort of way of then making it into a slogan and not really implementing it. So it's very important to really see that what are the components of the circular economy and how we can look at it. I'll just go back to Shanti maybe to really talk a bit about sort of SDGs, and as we are looking at SDGs 2030, how does that, and UNDP is doing a bit of work. I've been having some conversation with Aishani and some of the work UNDP is doing in other parts with the circular economy. And maybe you would like to share something, and then I'll move on to, after that I'll move on to Kushal, so you can keep your thoughts coming. Yeah.
Talking about SDG, there is a whole SDG, this dedicated SDG, I think, not calling it circular economy, but it talks about it in a greater length on sustainable consumption. I think circular economy in terms of SDG is also, again, going back to what Valerie and the ambassadors talked about, is about not just prosperity in terms of economics, and also going beyond what we need. Right? So sustainable consumption is also, like, once we are mindful of how much we need. I just recently read about like how much does it, like how much greenhouse gas emission is there for producing a pair of jeans. Like if you don't need a pair of extra jeans, then maybe you don't buy it. Like that is a sustainable consumption, and that is what SDG 12. I always get confused with these numbers, right? So SDG 12 is, like trying to advocate for. So that is like on the SDGs, but then going to other SDGs like 13 on climate action, it specifically talks about all these greening, like colleague from ILO talked about green economy, right? So I think circular economy can be linked as, like to all of the SDGs, if not, if you don't want to just bracket to one. So there is like on climate and also on sustainable consumption and then health and all of those, right? And also decent works, right? So because circular economy has, I think the way I see it, like 3 prongs. One is on greenhouse gas emissions directly, and that is what UNDP has been working on. Like, I will not want to like use another word, kind of like decarbonizing or minimizing the carbon emissions in our development pathway, especially in our case, because we aspire as a country to graduate from LDC status, right? And that means we want to fuel a lot of development activities. And if we are not mindful of how we do take up which development pathway, then we might be actually getting into the trap. Do we want to get into this trap and then like not protect our development against so far, right? So that is one. And I think another one is about the job creation that is also sustainable and like inclusive job creation is also part of what circular economy touches upon. And that is also what UNDP is looking at through different kind of activities on the ground which are less harmful to the environment, at the same time have other aspects that contributes to the national economy. So those are the kind of ways of like how, not calling it circular economy per se, we have been working in this area because it is just, as you've said, it's name tagging, right? So we don't really have to tag it this or that, right? But like we have been working on these directions, and circular economy, as I say, economic development without any angles, it has to be smooth, right? That's, I think, another way of looking at it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I totally agree. I mean, it's not to really, sort of box it into a circular economy and to say it's a start defining, but I think what we really want to talk about in the session was to really elevate the whole, sort of the definition, and to see that what can be some of those components coming in. Because also when we talk about anything to do with circular economy, or, we talk about these issues, what we also hear is that if you're not going to have a linear growth, because if you look at GDP, as a measure, is always talks about linear growth. You want growth to happen. It's the measure of growth is linear. And then, when you're talking about circular economy, it means that you are challenging the paradigm of linear growth. But then also recycling and working around the circular economy can also be a good business, and what Doko Recyclers is trying to, work on. So maybe you want to just emphasize on the business model and why this is a good thing to do.
Sure. So let me start with, like, if you look at circular economy, the notion of a circular economy versus how our modern economies have now been structured, it's easier to recycle a material in, like, it's easier to replace a material than to recycle a material in our modern economy. So in terms of low commodity prices have made it such that you don't really have the correct economic incentives to recycle. So, but when you look at the fundamental concept of a circular economy, and then you think about what are the challenges that Nepal faces as a country to move towards a circular economy. So our economy really opened up only in the late 1990s, if you think about it. So plastic pollution and waste segregation is not something that we're used to dealing with. And so when an elderly man in like a remote part of Humla disposes of a plastic wrapper, there's some ingrained belief in his mind that, you know, it will go back to the earth, it will decompose. Like, we're not used to this notion. And then, because we are in a geographically challenged terrain, you don't really have road access there, so waste has to be managed at the local level there itself. So how do you link that back into a circular notion, right? Like, how do you manage waste there without polluting the environment? How do you reuse it? And when you look at our entire economy as a landlocked nation, we are continuing to import so many resources and then continuously just throwing them away without completely reusing them or making the best use of them. So, and we have at Doko Recyclers, what we see is this constant influx of cheap disposable goods from China and India coming into the country, where most of the times we don't even know what materials are in there, what sort of composites are in there. We don't have the technology really to deal with these sort of, these sort of materials. So how do you, again, this is another fundamental challenge that we face as a country and as a business at Doko Recyclers. So at the same time, if you look at Nepal in terms of, as a low-income country, we already are much more circular than modern industrialized nations. We already do a lot more waste sorting, waste picking. We already do a lot more reuse. It's sort of ingrained. It's still ingrained in our notions. It's not these notions have completely eroded away. So how do you turn this into a development opportunity, right? How do you take this forward? So in terms of like, so if we look at now again, we need to look at what we have. Our strength is in the informal sector, but at the same time, if you see most informal waste workers or most of these people who are truly contributing to the circular economy are exposed to extremely hazardous conditions, extremely unsanitary conditions. They don't really have the health and safety required, and they don't really get the type of recognition that they should from the government or from the people itself. So how do you encourage this? How do you bring them into the formal economy? How do you increase recycling rates by working with them? And how do you reduce actual cost for the government and reduce the environmental impact? So that's something that we need to connect the dots with.
Yeah, so but my question was that, can be a good business? You know, can you make money by just getting into recycling and, you know, being part of this? Or is it that something that you need continuous support from some agency or something?
We hope so. I mean, we started 2 years ago with the hope to make money out of it while blending profit with purpose. And we see huge opportunity because, you know, it's a growing economy. It's completely virgin in terms of what has been done so far. We don't have the ability we haven't been able to deal with so many materials yet, and so there is a lot of opportunity. Electronic waste is a completely burgeoning field that has not been touched yet. We're the first professional company managing electronic waste. So there is definitely economic opportunity, but at the same time, it does not mean we need grants or subsidies from the government, but we do need the right incentives with the right policies in terms of supporting startups that are working in this field. Again, not in terms of actual subsidies, but in terms of the right policies. How do you, so there are so many scrap dealers or kabadiwalas. If you see, okay, they are, you know, they roam around on a cycle and you look at them, you think, okay, they are not really, you know, the notion of them being poor is attached to them, but they're easily making $300 to $400 a month, or 30 to 40,000 rupees. So there is a lot of economic opportunity. It's just, again, we really need to connect the dots at a policy level, yeah.
Thank you, Kushal. I think before Sixit, just start thinking on some of the larger, sort of things that we can think about as we are looking at circular economy. And you've been having plugged in through Tootle, so I'll leave that some time to think, and I'll move on to Kezang to talk about how is this concept in Bhutan, how does it, how awareness that is there, or is that being integrated now in some of the government policies, or how is the awareness within the community, the business community, the government? Well, what is happening in Bhutan on this, on the circular economy front?
Circular economy as a phrase is still young. But in terms of the holistic development approach that we have taken, I want to share something around gross national happiness. We have initiated, or rather, been on this path since the early 1970s under the leadership of our foresight at King's. And while we call it the philosophy of development that integrates economic health and environmental well-being, following the middle path. Some still call it a new development paradigm. We have done that, been there, but we also have a lot to go. GNH is more important than GNP. The pillars that are relevant, the 4 pillars, equitable socio-economic development. We are not leaving out economic development. It has to be there. Preservation of environment, conservation of culture, and of course, cross-cutting the good governance aspect of things that are required to extend this pillar. And this philosophy is built around people-centered development, and we have even gone further in terms of how sentient beings can be taken as part of this holistic development approach, and how happiness and well-being of people comes before economic growth. So balancing is an important critical element. And for those of you who are not aware, especially the young in the audience, Bhutan is one of the few countries in the world whose constitution enshrines environmental conservation and securing an ecologically balanced sustainable development while promoting justifiable socio-economic development. Our constitution also stipulates a minimum of 60% of country's total land to be maintained under forest cover for all time. And in terms of the initiatives that are going on, Bhutan has been fortunate to receive funding from development partners in the areas of sustainable consumption and production, in sustainable tourism, in sustainable and efficient industrial development. And currently there's an ongoing project which is assessing the specific needs of sustainable consumption and production in the areas of energy efficiency, greening curricula in the schools, green buildings, as well as greening offices, making offices paperless. So these are some of the things that are going on at present, and yeah, we are like many countries facing challenges, but we are getting there, and we are happy to work together in the Himalayan consensus system. Thank you.
Thank you, Kezang. Just a quick rejoinder to this is that, do you think the whole concept of circular economy as it is evolving, it is also an evolving concept, it's not a fixed concept, I mean, it's a large concept like a sustainable development. Do you think that forms is a part of the GNH, the larger GNH discourse? Can we say that the circular economy becomes, sort of the GNH is an overarching, a concept, and circular economy would fit into that? Can we make that statement, or? Oh
yes, of course, because with the circular economy, what you're looking at is using, reusing, recycling, and that is at the core of sustainability. And from an environmental friendly purpose point of view, from a waste management point of view, I think it is at the core circular economy. And again, I think calling it an economy is a little bounded from our Himalayan perspective. I would like to call it the circular Himalayas.
Okay.
I think fits in, although Bhutan is just a small part of the larger Himalayas. So I guess the larger Himalayas is the umbrella, and Bhutan is part of a stakeholder. Thank you.
No, surely by the end of the day, we will figure out the nomenclature. No, thank you, Kezang. So I'll go on to Sixit. I mean, so some of the large view thinking in terms of, from your experience on working about how ride shares can actually, make people not buy cars and not buy vehicles. And as you talk about, we keep talking about these people just buying vehicles that sit in parking lots, and that's not a very constructive and a productive thing. Maybe, you would want to touch that, and some of the larger thoughts on not only on ride shares, but on what are the areas in which we can, sort of use the same concept by which consumption is, controlled, and if there's less consumption, we don't have to actually recycle. Recycle only comes in if we have to consume, Yeah, Sixit.
So, I'll just take a few minutes of this time to build up this narrative.
Sure.
If you just happen to go 200 meters from here to Patandarwa Square, you'd find that Patandarwa Square was built around people. And therefore, you'd see big squares inside, where you do all the bhoj and everything, all the parties, right? You still, when you go to Patandarwa Square, you see old and the young engage into conversation. You find a sense of community. Because Patandarwa Square was built around community and people. And it was built when United States of America was not even a country. Now, when the West developed themselves, and mostly so in post-industrial era, there's been a significant damage, and we must agree to this fact. And what we are now doing is the cleaning up with all the circular economy and everything. We're doing the cleaning up. But when the industrial development happened, our cities developed around vehicles. When Ford produced more vehicles, or General Motors produced more vehicles, means we widened our roads to increase the number of vehicles. Not only the roads, we also had parking spaces for vehicles. Now, if you look at the statistics of United States of America, 96% of the vehicles at any given time are parked. And that's very less of the asset utilization. Now, every parking space that we have, and right here in the Hotel Himalaya as well, is a space that has been taken away from people. It could have been a football field for our kids to play. And we've gone to an extent in the cities like ours that even now Tootle Hill has been turned into a parking space for lifeless vehicles. What does it mean? It means that if we start by sharing mobility, we not only enable point-to-point mobility for people, we not only enable people to get jobs, but in due course of time, in a long-term future, we can set up a behavior in people by which we can shape up a new infrastructure. Which means that when we share rides, when we share vehicles, sharing mobility would not only reduce the vehicles on the streets, but also open up spaces in the parking lot. Now, what does it actually do? What it does is we reclaim spaces from vehicles to human beings. And as we reclaim spaces from vehicles to human beings, we then open up cities. We design, and the design of an urban infrastructure would evolve in itself that will then be built around communities and peoples. Now, if you go to, I come from Doti in the far west, and I still remember when I was a child, in our town, we had the stones in the floor, where we used to walk. We used to have petis where people could sit and chat. We used to have chautaros where community could actually do things, And that's the sense of cities and towns that should be developed around communities. So sharing ride is not just about providing point-to-point mobility, but also in a longer term, it's about shaping the urban infrastructure that will do away with 90% of the vehicles. Now, your second question was as to how we do it with others. Now, for example, the number of water bottles that plastic bottles that we purchase every day, the number of Coca-Cola that we drink through a plastic bottle every day. I'm not telling people not to drink Coca-Cola. I'm not telling people not to drink a bottled water. But what we need to do is, if we can dematerialize Coca-Cola, if we can have a flowing tap of Coca-Cola that can be built everywhere, if we can have a tap of clean drinking water that we can collect water in a glass bottle or a paper cup to drink, we'd have dematerialized soft drinks, and that could have enabled the consumption and into the circular economy. And the final point that I'm trying to share here is that there's a lot of hue and cry about the world is coming to an end, we're into doom. No, nothing of that sort is happening. We never moved out of Stone Age because we ran out of stone. We found coal. We didn't move out of coal and gas because we ran out of coal and woods. We found fossil fuel. And we'll go out of this not because we'll run out of fossil fuel, not because we'd have damaged the climate, but we'd have done a better way. We'd have innovated a better way of doing things. And these things are already happening for the last 20, 30 years. It's just that progress takes a long time. And the progress needs to build incrementally, one after the other. So there's a lot of hope and optimism. And the statistics is that, if you look at the carbon emission per GDP, it is on a decline since 1980, right? We still like to believe that India and China produce a lot of carbon in air, and therefore they're damaging the climate, which is not true. Because if you still look at the GDP per capita of carbon emission of India and China, it is significantly less than the West. It's like saying the overall obesity of China is more than US, which is wrong. Because overall obesity of China would be more because there are more people there. So we need to believe that the per capita GDP, per capita carbon emission is decreasing. With technology, with sharing economy, with circular economy, with dematerialized technology, we're heading towards the right direction. It's just that we need to accelerate the pace of this. Thank you.
Thank you.